Hello, and thank you for joining us and your interest in learning more about best practices for HR compliance and operational efficiency. As business operators, it is crucial to a company's success and to maintain quality and brand standards that they have a clear and easy to understand set of expectations and guidelines for employees. Oftentimes, this begins with an employee handbook and continues through systems and processes designed to track and avoid issues. Today, we're talking with Mark Young, the founder and CEO of myHRcounsel, an HR compliance and legal services company that provides unlimited subscription access to experienced employment and business attorneys, and Matt Goebel, founder and CEO of Woven, a SaaS platform designed to unify teams and simplify operation, accountability, and management. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining today and for sharing your experience and expertise with our audience. It's a pleasure having you both.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, Aaron.
So let's get straight to our discussion. Mark, as I mentioned a moment ago, companies oftentimes lean heavily on documents that they provide to employees as part of their onboarding as a way to establish standards and expectations. One of these documents is an employee handbook. What is the primary purpose of an employee handbook, and why is it essential for both employers and employees?
Thanks, Aaron. I mean, to me, employee handbook is the playbook. It's starting to get to be fall and football season, but all of the rules and the policies that you expect your employees, your managers, your supervisors to follow really should be in the employee handbook. It's really the essential document. I always say that probably needs to be up to date, and I really always encourage, not because I'm an attorney, but I really encourage prospects, friends, whatever it happens to be, to make sure that they have a legally drafted federal and state specific handbook.
And Matt, as an essential part of the employer-employee relationship, how does the employer ensure their employees have access to the latest version at all times?
Yeah, I think to feed off of Mark's analogy there, I think a lot of times, especially in the franchising world, where we do a lot of our work, is that you'll have these playbooks, right? The employee handbook is created, drafted, but it's inadequately shared with the team. So it's almost like the coach drafts up all these great plays. They're ready to go for the game, but they forget to give it to the quarterback and the rest of the team to know what they need to do, right? So distribution, a means of which that the team members, the hourly workforce, or just the workforce in general has access to it, is critical to just making sure that it's actually put into practice. So yeah, it's that just make it available wherever the employee is, but actually pushes it to them and gets acknowledgments, as we're finding it's very critical in today's world to essentially ensure that when it comes time to enforcing those rules, or worst case scenario when terminations have to happen and follow down process from that, if anything's challenged, is that you can actually prove and show that not only do they have readily available access to know about these, but they've actually acknowledged it and they've actually seen it, and it's all tracked and documented that yes, employee A did view this, knew about this policy, we educated on them, and we gave it to them, is also becoming very important. And so that's where tools like Woven come into play, is taking that document and then being able to distribute it and track and measure that the accountability is there as well.
Mark, how often should an employee handbook be updated, and what triggers an update?
Yeah, I think I would say best practices and the way that we think about it, as employment law attorneys, is it should be updated every year. When you think about the number of law changes just federally, there's been dozens that federal law changes this year, which is probably the most we've seen in years. And then depending on your state, with an election coming up, here in 60 days or so, there is is bound to be state law changes, as there will be elections, there will be changes in governorships, there will be changes, you know, in the different states. And if there's a change, well, there will be a change in presidents. There will be one of two presidents, and that will a lot of times drive state law changes depending on what the federal law and the federal government is rules are being put into place. A lot of times those states will do the opposite to balance off, you know, really what the federal government is doing, so that there's kind of a, you know, again, a balancing of the laws against federal and state, to keep kind of things in the middle, to be honest with you.
Sure. And Matt, as an evolving document, how should an employer be keeping their employees updated on these changes as they're making them?
Yeah, we actually find that, especially when working with some of our larger customers, that, you know, they might be across 20 plus different states, thousands of employees, but I think this applies to even if you're one or two locations and in the same state, is that it's fairly unreasonable, even though in a perfect world we would like it, it's fairly unreasonable to expect that your workforce, especially if they're like part-time hourly workforce, is going to read some 50, 100-page sometimes document when there is an update to one section for some specific law change reason that Mark's talking about, right? It's just while we can legally, organizationally check a box and say, we updated it, we push it out, and we pat ourselves on the back. I'll go back to the playbook analogy in football. Mark, I love it. I'm going to start stealing it. It's like you changed a play, but you forgot to tell the team, or you just expected the team to like find it in the playbook that you changed without telling them. So what we find is extremely useful is to extract those key policy changes, still publish the handbook, get it out there. It's a whole living document, but extract those key policies, especially if they're state specific or position specific, and be able to set them up so that they're targeted to those individual employees, and you can collect acknowledgement. So it's pushed directly to them where they are, either via email or push notification. They can actually then absorb and read just that specific policy change. And you can do this either on a recurring basis, or you can just at one time, like, hey, we just updated our XYZ policy, push it out to all the applicable people. Maybe it's only for California. You push it out to all your California employees, you get them to acknowledge it one time. So yes, we can now have a track accountable record that we have seen this new policy change, we rolled it out, we sent it to everybody, everybody's acknowledged it, we're good to go. I like the word operationalizes it, right? It takes it from the legal checking a box side to we actually rolled this out, and now we have an informed workforce that is aware of it and can put it into use.
Great, thank you. Mark, what are the most common legal pitfalls companies face when drafting or updating an employee handbook?
Well, you know, there are a lot, and you know, we knew what we were going to talk about here ahead of time. And again, as an attorney, I want to say is this. But again, we'll use the playbook. I think you know, one of the things that the example that Matt used is, you know, is great. The difficulties of keeping everyone up to date, including HR, with law changes, be it federal, be it state, be it city. A lot of times they'll either change the handbook and put that in there at the back and then send it out and hope someone checks the box. And as Matt said, you want to operationalize a lot of these things. So one of the, I think, key or maybe most difficult pieces is, you know, one, just keeping up with the law. The federal and the state, you know, it changes. It used to be everything changed on January 1, and you know, you knew that something new was coming in on January 1, and you sent out the employee handbook or the rules, you know, the manual new safety policy, whatever it happened to be. And now, rules come out on, September 5th, and that it changes everything, or changes a lot about the operations of the company. And so really staying up with all of the different things, especially when you get past, the federal laws that maybe hit the papers or hit the 24-hour news cycle more often. When you get to the state, to the county, and the city, the fact of just getting that up to date, and then again operationalizing it and getting it out to your employees is very difficult.
And staying with you, Mark, what role does this handbook play in legal disputes when they happen between employers and employees?
Yeah, I mean, the legal dispute piece is kind of the critical part. There's a couple of things I like to tell our clients. As the employee handbook changes, or maybe there's some additions. This year, the federal government came and said you couldn't have 7 different laws in the handbook. If you didn't update the handbook and send it out and talk about it, there was a high likelihood that you were going to get sued. A lot of plaintiff attorneys and class action attorneys look at this as an opportunity for them to make money, to be honest with you. And they said, it's more than likely that if I find someone that was terminated because of something they had on social media, and the company has a anti-social media or sharing of information, some non-disclosure things, more than likely those employers had that in their handbook, because not that many people went midway through the year. Again, I think this was, in September, and made those changes. And so what we're finding is, the litigation, the people looking for litigation, looking to make money, and looking to, again, advocate for employees who may have been fired, saw a lot of opportunity. And when you see it from the federal government standpoint, that's when the class actions come out, because if somebody was let go at this company, there was probably one at another company and another company. And so you'll see billboards, and you'll see all these different types of advertising for, were you let go for this purpose, etc. And they set up an 800 number, and they start gathering up people. Again, you look at what was wrong with the employee handbook and use that as the litigation, frankly, the playbook that wasn't up to date and didn't stick with the law.
Yeah. And I'm sure it's probably very, very common for them to feign ignorance, even if, notices were sent out. Oh, I didn't read that. I didn't take the time. It's important, I would imagine, to track and be able to say, we know that you saw it. We know that you're aware of it. So you really can't use that excuse anymore. And so, Matt, what are some best practices that companies can do to ensure they're going to be, or their best chances to be successful when a dispute like this happens?
Yeah, and I'll answer this from, again, the operational side of it, right? And talk about the chain of handoff and how do you disseminate that information. So this can take a lot of different forms in a lot of different organizations, but I would say that depending on your organization, look at it and see how many proverbial walls do you have to toss this information over before it gets to the people it needs to get to. And when you're a smaller organization, that might be just owner to their team, or HR person to the team, but location or two, or it can be pretty simple. As you scale, though, as you get to dozens of locations, hundreds of locations, multiple states, the layers between the HR teams, typically, that are crafting and updating this stuff, and then are sending it out via email or SharePoint or something, or if it's coming down from the franchisor, or whatever it is, it has to go through these. And again, large organizations are more prone to this, but it's HR did their job. They checked their box. They move on to their next project and task. They've chucked it over the proverbial wall to the regional director of operations, or somebody who's now supposed to get it out. this person receives a PDF and says, okay, and emails it out to all their regional managers that says, hey, get this out to your teams. He checked their box, right? They're done. And now the regionals are all on their own to figure out, okay, like, maybe it gets buried in their inbox. Maybe they actually forward it on to their district managers and down to their managers. And my point in this, and I could go on all the way down, the point is that there's the tools being used, which are most commonly like email, sending out PDFs, passively posting it to like your payroll system site that, by the way, your hourly employees never log into unless they're like buying a house, or either pay subs or W-2s for filing taxes. Like they're not going there. It's lost that chain, the tools being used, email, PDFs, etc. There's no accountability in that chain. And so when you get to the fact of saying, oh, our handbook's updated, I would imagine, and Mark, I'm not an attorney, but I would imagine that it'd be fairly easy in these large organizations to go find locations that are still posting and using dated handbooks, because, man, I'm going to go back to the football analogy again. It's like the coach updated it, and then all the printed copies didn't like take back and give new printed copies. They just let all the team have their printed copies still, and like, yeah, passively, like, insert this sheet if you get a chance. Like, it just breakdown in that accountability from the change being made and that box being checked all the way out into the field to make sure that every single person not only has access to the latest, but they no longer have access to the old stuff, right? That can cause confusion or otherwise still pose a problem that says, oh, well, I did look at the handbook, but look at it right here. It's old still. It still says this. I think there's a lot about that in terms of single points of truth. We talk with our customers a lot about that. Single point of truth. Don't disseminate PDFs. Don't just upload a PDF somewhere or email out a PDF, because once it's out in the wild and it's been downloaded to a desktop at some location, or some manager who loves paper prints it in their binder in the office or something, like, just disconnected that. Like, there's no way for you to easily update that document. When you start talking hundreds of locations, thousands of employees, having that single point of truth becomes critical. Without it, you can't create that accountability chain. You just it's too hard to do.
Yeah, right. Their attorney walks into the office, grabs that 4-inch 3-ring binder. It's been sitting there. It's got dust on it. Opens it up, and how long has that been sitting there, right? Which version of the manual is still sitting there in the office? And they can say, hey, this is what's available to your people. That, I imagine, that would be a big deal.
Probably.
So let's shift gears. Sorry, what was that?
I was going to say problematic for sure.
Yeah. Let's shift gears for a minute. So Mark, can you define what best practices in HR means in today's workplace, and how has that evolved over time?
Yeah, and it, with sort of staying on the employee handbook, and I like what Matt talks about operationalizing, the human resources. When you go from, I'll say from hiring to firing, there's a lot of information and there's a lot of back and forth from supervisor to employee, from, owner to vice presidents to, whatever their titles happen to be. There's a lot of handoffs of rules and how we work those rules and how we disseminate information, et cetera, as Matt has talked about. With the employee handbook, it's a great one. I see people who have an employee handbook that's still in a 3-ring binder, and it says something like, 2013's, whatever, time away from the office, and that was when the new handbook came out, because it took HR 5 years to put the handbook together. The handbook happens to be 272 pages, which we advise our clients narrow that down to about 50 if you can, and only get in the handbook what is essential, again, in best practices on those critical legal issues. Don't throw in a non-compete in there or your benefit plan that might be different in the vice president level to, the supervisor level and such, just because it's easy to put it into one 3-ring binder, is probably one of the biggest mistakes we see in employee handbooks. And frankly, in a lot of the policies, keeping policies up to date. When things change, federal, state, county, maybe you open a new office, a lot of people will, now we have remote employees. So how do you get the remote employee up to date on what the rules are for remote? Whether it's things like how do I put my hours in my new HCM, and how am I getting reimbursed for expenses, and what's the process for that? The idea of getting into HR and being the one that is firing people and being able to flip through the employee handbook and say, see, it says right here you weren't able to do that. No one gets into HR to do that. I don't know of anyone who said, yeah, that's why I want to be in HR. To sit down with employees and walk through, how can you improve what you're doing? How, on tough performance management issues and on, positive performance management issues, getting information disseminated across the organization in a way that people will not only remember it, and again, with systems, making sure that you, from a litigation standpoint, that employees have received the documents, but how do they actually operationalize it? How do we make our organizations better? And, we had more time because we weren't, we were all together, and we would maybe at lunch once a month, we would have best practices on how to sell, and everyone would come in. And now we've gotten to a point where, a lot of learning is online, and again, you hope that everyone takes it, and now you have to track it, with the system and everything else. But we've made it less, again, operational, less fun, to be able to go through some of these things that HR really wanted to do and why they wanted to get into it. And because of litigation and that, we spend more time, I think, protecting the organization for things that we don't want employees to do, and we're not spending enough time really getting through, whether it's legal information or whether it's just operational. We're not spending enough time to really talk through, what do you want employees to do, and how can we not worry about the litigation factor so much, and we can get, again, better performance and better, employee engagement while you're talking about things that, yeah, there are some litigation issues, but let's get people more involved and more engaged, and make HR fun again.
Great. So how should employers handle sensitive issues such as harassment, discrimination, workplace conflicts?
Yeah, I think, again, one of the things that we miss is we have the document, as Matt said, you have the PDF and you send that out, and it's a 10-page or a 1-page, we are against discrimination and harassment, and read this. Or they take the LMS, the learning management system, and some people, do real well watching a video. Maybe there's a couple of examples, and some people, really need to ask questions as they go through. I think as we think about learning and changing behavior, whether it's sexual harassment or how people treat each other and discrimination, we do a lot of time spent with documents to protect against litigation, and we're not putting enough time, whether you're the lawyer or whether you're in HR, again, teaching the kind of behavior that we want to see in the organization. And then we don't get on the issues quick enough to really make people say, oh, I see, somebody treated someone this way, and the next day we got our organization together. I had a client where they had a party, and there was just terrible behavior, and they had us in. It was a Saturday. They had us in on Monday morning, and we went through everyone in the organization, going through discrimination and harassment, webinar, for lack of a better word, but also did some examples, what doesn't work, what doesn't, and we asked, I think questions that were uncomfortable for people to ask on whether some of these things were appropriate in the organization. Not were they legal, but were they appropriate? And again, giving examples, not going into, specific people's names and everything else. But again, really thinking through. HR is still, dealing with human beings, and they're dealing a lot with how do we teach people the right behaviors, and how do we, again, don't let this stuff sit for days, weeks, months. Get that uncomfortable conversation with the rest of the organization as quickly as possible so it doesn't permeate to more.
Great. And Matt, I know that Woven offers some services that uniquely addresses this issue. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've touched on it several times now. I mean, we happen to call it our policies feature, but I mean, all it is at the end of the day is an extraction, typically from the handbook, of key things that you want to operationalize. It's the little nuggets that affect the day-to-day flow of business, right? Think dress code, time off, sexual harassment, time and attendance. All these are like the common things we see, probably the most common. These are things that in a high turnover environment, again, we work with a lot of large franchisees, a lot of brick and mortar. So you're talking about thousands of frontline hourly workforce that, they're unfortunately looking at 6 to 12 week lifespans before they're being turned over, and you're getting new. And so it is a little bit different in how you manage and disseminate information in such an environment versus, say, like corporate America office worker, where your longevity's longer before moving on to the next job. So I think our policy feature helps the customers, or I know it helps our customers, in taking those critical things that affect operations. It affects how the business can run day to day at these individual locations. And it breaks them down into bite-sized pieces. Because while I can't directly speak to this because I didn't get swept up in the TikTok generation type thing of small little incremental bites of information and videos, that is the world we live in. And especially with the existing hourly workforce in America, these are a user base. It is a base of people that is how they're used to. They've grown up, they were raised consuming information in these tiny little segments. And I'm not commenting on attention spans or anything else, but like that is how they best learn. They best learn through little bite-sized chunks. So giving them a 238-page PDF is almost guaranteed that it will not be read. Even giving them a one-page PDF, they might not read it. But having a tool like Woven, where an HR person can still make it fun, can still create video assets, audio assets, make sure it's tracked. It's not quite LMS level, so it's not like they're going through a whole like log in somewhere else and go take a course and complete it. It's just kind of like, hey, here's some information, watch this, acknowledge that you've seen it. It's a little less intimidating, a little more simple. I would say though that to Mark's point about making it fun, right? Because yeah, we could talk all day long about like the protectionist aspects of it. And while those are critical, I love when, because we build a tool, we build a hammer, right? We give our customers hammers. And I always use the analogy that you can build a house with a hammer, you can smash your hand in with a hammer. I love seeing when we give our customers these tools and they actually take it to do some cool culture building stuff with it, right? Like we're there every 30 days. Woven automates all this stuff, by the way. I guess it's something I should have mentioned, is that you load up your sexual harassment policy and you say, all of our managers need to see this and acknowledge it every 6 months, 3 months. It doesn't matter what you say. And Woven will automatically send that out to them, collect their acknowledgement, records all of that history, et cetera. So, but you can take that same tool, and I've seen it deployed where they all of a sudden, like, we have some customers that have like the five non-negotiables of how we treat our customers. And they push that out every 30 days to their frontline employees because it's a drumbeat for them, right? This is how we operate. This is our culture. This is who we are. And they use the same tool that they're using to push out for, here's our dress code and here's why time and attendance is important, and those things, which are all critical to sound operations, they're using that same tool to push out the fun stuff, right? This is who makes us who we are. This is why our customers love us and come back, and they're using those tools in the same way. So I think it's important, again, just to make it in a consumable way, right? Operationalize it so that the information, whatever it may be, protectionist or fun building, culture building, like make it in a way that's digestible, reaches your end user in a way that doesn't disrupt them or force them to go outside of where they're going every day already, and is trackable, so that should something happen and you need to prove, you need to take a termination action, and you need to prove without reasonable doubt that they have seen this, they have read it, they have acknowledged it multiple times, multiple versions of it as it evolved, that you can do so with the technology or the tools you have.
Great. Mark, what HR trends do you see shaping the future of work, and how can employers prepare for them?
Well, I want to say, which is related to the answer, Matt and Woven, one of the things that has changed, and it's, again, policies, manuals, changes in, whether it's safety or whatever it happens to be, especially among the many different industries that have franchises. Getting the information out, let's say one time a year or one time every 3 years, we updated handbooks and stuff, just isn't going to work in this environment. I mean, to be able to have a tool like Woven to send out every 30 days, in updates, we used to have the, handbook newsletter that we would send out, and it would be, who's been here for 5 years, who's been here for 5 months, and everything. And then we would have some pieces to that, and they were bite-sized chunks of how did we, spread information that was important. Things like, what are the 5 non-negotiables, which you can, use in there. Like, we aren't going to treat our employees this way. They end up becoming these protection, items that are in your handbook, but don't need to be in your handbook because you're pushing them out more often. The idea of TikTok, where, we're watching, adults, children, whatever it happens to be, looking at TikTok at the state fair and watching the bus, and how many people were looking at their phone, and sending something out through Woven, once a month of just a reminder, there's these things have changed, or just a reminder, our 3 most important things to our customer are these. It's the reminder, and it's again the technology and the fun in delivering this type of information in a way that is how people are taking these bite sizes of information versus a 2-hour, let's get everyone together on a Teams call and walk through each one of those things, because what, about 7 seconds and they've turned off, versus sending out some things and just click on this, and maybe you click on a fun TikTok video and 10 seconds of just a reminder, these are the 3 things we never do or would never say to a client. And I guarantee you those, the majority of your employees in a franchise world are going to remember that. And that, again, it's the repeatability, it's the ability to deliver that information that they don't even know it's, protecting the legal side of it, but it really is, I think getting information out and repeating information, especially those critical pieces that organizations want to make sure that their employees, remembered when they first read their handbook or their manual, but are also, displaying that information or displaying that those actions, whether it's a supervisor or whether it's somebody that is working at the cash register. They're all, at least they should know, because they've seen it in a lot of different ways, and they're displaying that kind of behavior and that, positive behavior. And more people are seeing that. The person that has 1 day of experience and one person that has a month, that kind of permeates throughout the organization. it's a great tool to that Woven has to be able to really get some creativity going on information for franchises.
Absolutely. You know, the thing is that business owners, operators, managers, they all want to create a culture, right? Not a cult of personality, but a fun, enjoyable. Everybody's having a great time. They're giving a great experience to their clients, their customers, and it sounds like a great way to do this is to really operationalize these things, create a great manual, a succinct manual, as you said, Mark, not a 300-page document, but a succinct, very direct, and honest document, really, for their people to embrace and be a part of. And Matt, operationalize that, give them the opportunity to be reminded about that on a regular basis, and really participate in that. So we're down to a couple minutes left in our call. Any last words from either of you?
Matt, I'll give you the first shot at it, but I have a couple of closing pieces that if you want to think about it, you can give me the nod, and we'll take our playbook, our offensive playbook this weekend being the start of the NFL, or is it?
It's today. I think it's
tonight. Yeah. So, Aaron, one of the things that you asked, and I probably didn't touch, as I was talking about the bite-sized pieces and being creative and how we get information out, but the shaping of work and how that's changing. Again, franchises, I think of franchises as a lot of people are there live. They're working the cash register. They're working maybe in a salon. They're working in a restaurant and such. And so getting people together at the same time, kind of sharing the information, the idea that we had for the discrimination harassment that happened on a Saturday night, company Christmas party, to get at the fixing the behavior is difficult because you don't get together, and then you have different organizations and that have remote employees. So how do you share that information where some people need to hear? They might be introverted, they might be extroverted, and they need to hear other people say that. They need to see the owner or the general manager and hear them say, I believe in this company, I believe in these policies. We have not put policies in place just to put policies in place. We're not making it so it's not fun anymore. But we do keep, we do take these policies very seriously. And so if something does happen, we do expect you to understand this information. And so if at the end of the year we have another employee handbook coming out or some new policy manuals, we expect you to take these seriously and take the time to read that. You may have to pay them for that, and make sure you have an attorney that you can get a hold of and make sure if they're taking a half an hour but they're getting paid for that, that might actually reshape kind of how we used to do stuff, which was the day that you started, you had 4 hours and you had a 3-ring binder and you got to review all those things, and that was your first day. And you would go home and you'd say, that was so boring. All I did was look through manuals all day. And work cannot be like that anymore because people will move on to the next thing.
As they often do, very quickly. Yeah, my closing remarks will just add that, there's doing this right just isn't about like, oh, great, our organization's now more protected, et cetera. Like, great, we checked a different box, right? We checked all the boxes now, and so we're good to go. I think there's a larger radiating effect about doing this appropriately, where once everybody's aware, everybody's in the know, right? And stuff isn't just trapped in a document, that it becomes a friction point. It becomes a point of contention between your manager that's responsible for that location. And again, in franchising, you're talking about multiple locations. Sidebar really quick, I'll just say that one of the most thankless, hardest jobs that I've ever witnessed is like the manager of a franchisee location that has to manage these high turnover hourly workforce and is expected to grow. Anyways, they have a lot on their plate. I'll just leave it at that because we don't have time to go into it. But how, putting the burden on them by giving them a PDF and saying, make sure your team's aware of this, right? Like they don't need that. They're swamped as it is, right? Just running the day-to-day. They don't need to. And it's honestly where a lot of the breakdown happens is even the most well-intentioned managers just run out of time to do all the things you want them to do. And so woven and where we actually see this really cool effect in rolling out these HR side of what we do and the operations tool side is it almost, it takes away this like friction point between managers and employees because employees can no longer, the hourly workforce employees can no longer play dumb. I don't know if that's the right way to phrase that, but they can't be like, well, I didn't know the dress code was this, or I didn't know our time and attendance policy was this. Like, and kind of play dumb and kind of push it back on the manager to have to teach it to him again. And you know what I'm saying? Like it's friction, it's no value add type work for that manager. And it drains them, right? It causes burnout of this key position within the organization. And so what we see, and we didn't actually intend for this. I wish I could say we did, but it was a great side effect that happens in almost every one of our customers is that their managers start reporting back that like, this is great. Like my employees no longer question this stuff anymore because they know that it's being tracked. They're acknowledging it, right? They're seeing it. They're getting it dripped to them, and they no longer try to play those games. Now, sure, there's still other aspects they have to manage, but like the friction and the burnout cycle that these managers are in is kind of alleviated. So yeah, I think it's the radiated effect of just not just checking the organizational compliance boxes, but also how do you create a better culture for your team? How do you extend the longevity of your key positions like managers, reduce their burnout, right? Keep them in position longer, let them focus on value add activities versus just chasing the cats around, trying to herd them, those types of things. I think there's a long tail benefit chain to putting some of these tools into place.
That's a great point, and thank you, Matt. Thank you also, Mark, both of you gentlemen. Thank you for your time today and your expertise. It's been very valuable. It's been enjoyable speaking with you. And for our audience, thank you for your attention today. We'll give the contact information for Matt and Mark here upcoming. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We appreciate you joining us and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, guys.
Thank you, guys.